All right, welcome everybody to this week's edition of the Bigfoot Notes from the Field blab that we do weekly. Uh, I have an announcement. First of all, Tom Carroll, who was our regional director for the Northwestern United States and Western Canada, uh, has really no time in his life right now. He has a number of things he's trying to juggle in his personal life, so he stepped away from being a regional director. So now we're basically without one for the Northwest. And yesterday I appointed Milo Rogers as the assistant regional director for that entire portion of the country. So I'd like everyone to welcome Milo to that position. You'll be handling the Northwestern region. Eventually, once we find somebody who wants the director's position, of course, Milo will stay on in that position. And I encourage the other regional directors to appoint an assistant director, to help them in all their work, because it really, as we grow, it's going to actually be a quite a handful. I'm sure, Milo, you're already finding that out.
I'm doing all the driving now.
Yeah, a lot of driving. Yeah, of course, you've always liked doing a lot of driving. So
yeah, so it kind of falls into my lap that way.
Coyote Man 5 is asking where Milo's from. Milo's from Western Washington. He currently lives in Enumclaw, Washington.
Yeah, about 30 miles from Mount Rainier, so I'm good. Yep,
you're good.
Look at that out my back door.
That's right. I'm jealous.
Yeah, I love that mountain.
Let me give you an update. There was, in fact, I don't know, send you, Milo, yet the list of people in the Northwest region?
No, I haven't. If I did get it, I haven't checked my email. I'm kind of like making it the default so everything could go into it. So right now, I gotta play with that.
We have one of our team leaders in Northern Washington, because of the sensitivity of his job, I won't use his name, but we'll just call him Thorfinn. Joe's trying to come on. There he is.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
I was just good. I was just telling everybody about. Brian's coming on too. Good. Just some of the updates, of course. You guys. Hey, Brian.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So you guys know, and Joe knows, of course, and Milo. Yesterday, Tom Carroll, who was our regional director for the Northwest United States and Western Canada, had to step down from his position as regional director. So we're on the hunt for a new regional director. And Milo Rogers, who's a long-time, very close friend of mine, almost family, he's been like a brother for many years, has accepted the position of assistant director for the Northwest region. So we want to welcome Milo to that position. And Milo, you and Joe and Jeremiah, and when Jay comes back, Jay's going through a lot of personal stuff right now, but he's going to continue with us as the Southeastern regional director. You guys, the regional directors, and I encourage each regional to have an assistant director like Milo is right now, because as we grow, we're going to be getting more and more teams. And I know the document that I sent out to you guys, Joe, I had 28 states at that time, and that was an old list. And I know we're in at least 32 states and several provinces of Canada. So, and then of course we have a team in Australia, one in England, and one in Norway. So we're actually an international organization now. So, and Adam Busbridge is we call him our continental director.
Be careful how you say that.
For Australia. So I guess as far as that news goes, that's what's going on organizationally. Thorfinn sent me a text yesterday or day before saying that there was a cross-country skier that vanished without a trace in Northern Washington. So I just asked him for an update by text. He said they suspended the search, and apparently the guy just vanished out of the blue. And, if you're a snowshoe skier, That's kind of unusual in the snow to just vanish without any kind of trace. So that's interesting. Doug's following the what's going on with that, and he's got some new people. Doug is or Thorfinn, I'm thinking somebody else. Is our sort of our special ops guy. He's a Marine combat veteran, and his job allows him to be in those wilderness areas on an official basis. So he's sort of our long range recon guy, for those with military experience, and he's invaluable as far as that goes. And Milo, he's one of your team leaders, so I'll be sure that you're in contact with him. He's really a super guy, really, really on top of his game when it comes to being in the field and knowledge about this stuff. So I recorded earlier, of course, I mentioned, that I'm going to be doing a podcast here in the near future, and I have about 2 months worth of shows recorded already. And we did one with one of your people earlier, Milo, Brandy.
Yeah, I know.
And Tom still is with us. He's going to occasionally help out when he can. And Tom's a great guy when it comes to technical expertise. And he's enhanced some of the recordings that Brandy has made from her house. And there's two really, really unique ones. One of them is a bunch of coyotes. And if you've heard coyotes, there are usually a lot of them. They're really noisy. And there's actually two vocalizations in that recording. The first one you don't hear quite as loud until Tom enhanced it, and you can hear this thing going "wah," at the group of coyotes, and they all shut up instantly. And if anybody knows coyotes, you can go out and yell and do whatever you want; they don't stop making noise. But whatever this was made them stop dead cold. And then moments later, there's another really loud yell, apparently at the coyotes. So that's fascinating. That's something, and I talked to one of our active police officers who's a member of the Jevning Research Group earlier today, and he was telling me about some resources that police have where they can run audio through and really do a lot with audio. So I'm going to see if he can't take those recordings and see what he can come up with on that end, see what more we can get out of those. But and the other recording that's a really good one is, and she even hesitated to use the word wood knock because it's not what that is at all. There is something being slammed so hard, wood on wood or whatever it's being smacked against, that it's just a loud crack. I mean, if you were standing, it's like a gunshot. Yeah, Joe, you've heard it. It's like a gunshot. I mean, just the reverberation, it was so loud and so intense. And I can tell you in terms of vocals, I've heard a lot of Sasquatch vocals over the years, and I didn't mention on the recording. I'm going to use that recording for one of the podcast shows because it turned out so well. And Tom is going to actually dub in the original recording so that listeners will get to hear that in its full capacity. So one of the recording or audios. I'm still thinking about recordings. In terms of vocalizations, a former girlfriend and I, about 10 years ago or so, were up on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. And there used to be up on the Quinault River. There's where it splits. There's on the North Fork and the main fork of the Quinault River. It's about, I think, 12 or 13 miles from Highway 101 as you drive along the river. There's a main campground called Graves Creek, and there used to be another one on the other side called the North Fork Campground. There were only about 7 camp spots. They weren't very good, but it was a nice place to get away from people, and if you didn't want to go to the main campground where there was a lot more people over there. So we camped in that spot one night, and after we had eaten dinner, it was just beginning to get dark, and we decided to go for a walk up the road. And there used to be, and it may still be there, a ranger station that's used part of the year, so it was unmanned at this time. And there's a huge ridge that divides the two sections of the river there, and I mean huge. We were walking back, and I had a recorder in my pocket, and this vocal, there was something up there just 150 feet above us on the ridge screamed so loud, and it was no cat, it was nothing else. It had to be one of these things in my estimation, and you could hear people all over down in the campgrounds and stuff. and their dogs are barking. People are saying, "Oh my God, what's that? What's that?" It was, but it's one of it only did it one time, and it's one of those things. You're going like this, you're thinking, "Crap, it's going to do it again." And of course, there was never any. There was no. People always want to call when we're doing this. So anyway, that was interesting to do that recording. I'm getting some really interesting, stuff for the new podcast, and even my old friend Mr. Black has consented to do one of the shows as long as I disguise his voice, and Tom's going to help me do that. So, news-wise, that's kind of what's going on. Other than Jeremiah was going to be with us tonight, but he's actually in the field, and I don't know, Joe, if you knew about this, but they had a triple sighting up there just yesterday, I think, or earlier today. Apparently, three different sets of people did. Okay. And apparently they're all pretty shook up. So he's up there trying to get a handle on that situation. And last night, he and his team were up in his research area, and they heard two groups of these creatures apparently having territorial squabble. And he said it sounded like a bunch of chimps going at each other, and he got a bunch of recording from that. So I'm anxiously waiting to hear that recording also.
That'd be cool.
Hey, Will, is that common where two groups will kind of like battle for territory? Is that very common?
Yeah, among other primates, if you look at films of chimps and gorillas, when they do that, they encounter one another. They'll make a lot of displays, both vocally and visually. And they're not actually going to fight. It looks like they're about ready to tear each other apart. All that display, the visual and the audio, is intended to intimidate the other group. And eventually, one of the groups will back down, and they peacefully go their own ways. So, and I've known of reports of these things doing exactly the same thing, where two groups will, get really intensely vocal with each other, and then at some point one will back down and they peacefully go their own direction. So very primate-like behavior. So we were gonna talk about, at least start talking about Bigfoot photo evidence, what to look for, and Jeremiah suggested that, and I think what he intended was not so much obviously if you're gonna see one, you get your camera, you're gonna try to take whatever photographs you can. Which is easier said than done. But in terms of looking at what's out there, I think that's what he intended. Of course, YouTube has a ton of stuff. 99% of it is pure junk. And from my own experience, there's two main things that I look for in those videos. And of course, there's people with still photos up there. I mean, there are particulars you can look for in still photos, but the video is kind of the big thing. When you look at things like Paul Freeman's film, that's complete garbage because, he's really close to the thing. It's moving very slowly and plodding, and it's bouncing as it's taking steps.
And it's its son.
Right. It has to. I think it was probably his son in the suit because two parts. Sasquatches never bend their knee or never straighten their knees. Excuse me. They never straighten their knees when they walk. They always walk with their knees bent, which is why people always describe their movement as being very fluid, very smooth, because that knee being bent acts sort of like a shock absorber as they're moving. And when you walk like a human does, we lock our knees when we take a step, and it was described in one college class I took many years ago as almost like we pole vault from step to step. We go to take a step, we lock our knee, and then we sort of bounce over it like this, and it gives us that bouncing motion. So when you see that, doggone well, that's somebody in a suit because they're walking exactly like a human. And again, the other thing, if you see a film where they're walking and they're straightening their legs out, doing one of these things, well, that's nonsense because they don't walk like that. And I don't know personally anybody who could try to imitate the way they do walk because it'd be extremely difficult. Even if you watch a Patterson film, the creature never straightened its leg out entirely. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that or.
Well, I did see one program where they had this big guy, he's an athlete also, and he was trying to mimic the walk, and he couldn't do it, because of the angle that he had to lean forward, the way he had to bend his knees. He couldn't even do it. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, I've always kind of been a little bit skeptical of the Patterson film, but recently I saw this. It was like an article or something, but they showed, and maybe you talked about this before, but they showed how in one frame you can actually see Hattie's digits underneath her foot, and they said that would have been kind of impossible to do in a suit, I mean, they could to make a suit that way. They showed like the bottom of her foot, and it was just exactly like a human's almost. I mean, like
very similar, yeah. Yeah, and one of the impressive things when you look, there's some still photos, of course, from the film. When you look at it from the back as it's walking away and it's lifting its left foot up, and you see the whole pad.
Yeah.
Look at the calf muscle on its right leg. The calf muscle is bulging out, and somebody in a suit, you certainly wouldn't see that kind of definition. Another big thing in 1967, after they got the film, they took it to Hollywood, to the special effects experts, the top people at the time. Would have been, I'm sure, 1968 at that point, which was about the time they did Planet of the Apes. And you often hear people say, well, look, they did it with Planet of the Apes. Why couldn't they do it with this? Well, number one, those weren't that great of suits that they made. Yeah. But one of the key things about those suits that you never hear people talk about is the fact that in the back where the actors had to step into the suit, well, they didn't really even have a zipper. They had a really difficult way of kind of latching those suits together, and they could never make it where it was seamless. That's why when you see those movies, they're wearing clothes, over the gorilla suits, because that was so obvious, that opening in the back. They never could really figure out how to make a suit that was seamless like that. So if they couldn't do it, it's extremely improbable that Joe Blow down the street, thought he was going to make some dummy gorilla suit and have it seamless in the back like that. It's impossible. So that's one of the big telltale things from that.
And make it a female.
And making a female. Who would have thought a female?
Yeah, who would have thought that? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Who would have thought that at the time? So, and that's a good one, talking about the Patterson film. We talk about photographic evidence, and, DeHinden and the rest of them back then. And I know Renee told me personally, I asked him once in the 80s, I said, we used to sit around at his house and he'd bring all the slides out, and we'd sit and look at all the individual slides from the film and talk about it. And he looked at me one time and he says, I quit being a Sasquatch hunter the day after Patterson got the film when I found out. He says, because we had the proof. He said, I didn't, because I asked him, I said, why didn't you guys all go back to Bluff Creek and do this exhaustive search? Why didn't you try to get more film footage, more evidence? And his answer was, well, we thought we had it. Good point, I guess. I mean, because, people in this subject today are not the same as they were back then in terms of what they're, everybody tries to keep doing the same things they were doing. And in those days, they didn't really have any answers about whether these things were real or weren't real. They were trying to find out, one, if there was a serious reason to go out and look for these things, if there was really something to it. And secondly, to get enough proof to get the scientific community involved. So every time they would go down there on a reported track find, they were going down, they were evaluating the prints to see if they were real, fake, whatever. And when Patterson finally got the film, they figured their job was over. They figured, okay, now the scientific community will take this over. We've done our part. And of course, it didn't happen. I don't know if did you guys see the little video I posted on our Facebook page?
Yeah.
I made a few notes because I think it's pertinent to this discussion, at least some of it. Renee made a good comment when he said, the Sasquatch is nothing unusual. It wasn't something that started in the 1950s. Native American tribes all over the continent. And they were talking about hundreds of references in terms of tribal and groups and band historical references, all have this stuff. Spanish missionaries were recording this stuff from natives 300 plus years ago. So it wasn't like it just started in the 50s. It's around hundreds of years. And long before that, long before written records, and not just on this continent, but many continents around the world. Renee brought up a good point. He was talking about it when he says he didn't give a damn about what scientists had to say. And I tell you what, he talked just like that all the time. He says, if I'm out in the bush, up on the mountain somewhere, and I see 5 Sasquatches walking around, and there's 60,000 scientists all screaming in unison at the bottom of the mountain, there's no such thing. He says, I don't give a damn what they say. I see the thing right here, So, in his Dehinden-esque way of explaining it, that was a good point. He says, who are these people? What do they know about it? Especially if none of them have done any kind of research whatsoever, but they make comments by saying, well, this couldn't possibly exist. Well, in anthropology classes in college, they don't teach anything about Sasquatch. So by the time these people get their masters and PhDs, and the higher up you go academically, the more narrow your area of study is focused. So by the time they get to be a PhD, usually they're in a very, very narrow niche in what their expertise is. So what do they really have to offer that does anything in terms of, and then we're talking about this stage of the whole investigation. Now, once they're proven to be real, then of course it's out of our hands, it's into the scientific community's hands, because then we've done our job like Renee, thought they did. We will have done our job. It's time to pass it on to them, and we go off onto other pursuits. But until that point, they don't have much to offer us unless they want to offer things like, and when we do have some people now who are going to assist us with, proper documentation and collection techniques to really lay the groundwork for the scientific community to utilize what it is we're doing.
It gives us a common base. It gives us all a common base. So.
Exactly. Yeah, we're trying to standardize what we're doing with this, and trying to utilize being non-scientists as much scientific foundation as we can, so that it becomes useful, for professionals down the road. Renee made a comment. Now, Renee, you have to understand, people like Renee and John Green and those guys had sort of a narrow focus when it comes to looking at this subject. Now, some of them were a little bit more open-minded than others, but like Renee made a comment about, he knew all these people, and he says no one ever dedicated their entire life to going out looking for these things. Now, he did that probably more than anybody else, but the big problem with that was by not having a support system. Didn't have a job, didn't have, he let his family go, and all this stuff, it severely limited his ability to go out and look. I know from knowing him all those years personally, Renee would go to Bluff Creek one time a year. And if he could go someplace close by that was, there was a reported sighting, and I'll give you an example. We weren't that far away in southern Washington, in Vancouver, when the occult stuff was going on. And I pestered him with letters and phone calls that entire time, telling him, if you want to see one of these things, you need to get down here right away. Just a few hour drive, he could have been down there, but I know he didn't have a lot of money. He never had a lot of money. It wasn't until the 9th month, I think it was March or April of 1990, that he finally came down. Well, by that time, the creatures were gone. They'd moved on. So all he was able to do was actually talk to some of the witnesses, and that was about it. Back to British Columbia he went. So he left empty-handed. Had he come down when I told him to, he probably would have had a sighting or more. It was just that common what was going on, and all the vocalizations and everything else that was going on. So, so when he made that comment, yes, you do need the support system financially. Now, if you had money backing you to be in the field, if I had money backing me, I'd be out in the field all the time. I could devote, I don't think you can ever devote 100% of yourself to it, but certainly 90, 95%. of your time, doing some really intense field work. With what we're doing with this group, if we had some financing and put enough of our teams and people into the field, with the network we have, we could really, I think, accomplish.
Well, it's not even for me or the group that we're starting with, Brandy and her family and stuff, and me and mine. It's not really just going out on an excursion. It's sustainability once you get out there.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the thing. And at this point, hopefully we can arrange some backing at some point. But we're trying to work on that. But I'd like to be able to field teams, at least enough teams, to really make a serious effort at this. And I think with the knowledge we have and experience, we'd put the issue to rest in a relatively short time. So let's see. Now, Renee did make a good point now, and this goes along with photographic evidence. He said that every piece of evidence should be challenged and torn to pieces to get to the kernel of truth. If there's something to it, now we're talking about now, even if it's a good set of tracks, there have been lots of fakers out there, hoaxers that have, there's still tons of people that think Paul Freeman's was real. It was absolute rubbish. So when you have to really scrutinize things that are found, so he was right in that. I mean, it's okay to tear pieces of information apart to see what we're left with. If we're left with something good, like with the Patterson film, he said he spent 20 years trying to prove it was fake, couldn't do it. So it withstood the test of time and scrutiny. He also mentioned something that we see in terms of photographs. He says, there were a few still photos at the time floating around of shadows in the bush. He says those mean nothing, which is true. We look on YouTube today, there are tons and tons of people out there, and it's even gotten its own name. They call them blob squatches. There was one guy by the name of Mitchell Waite who passed away here this year. It has to be one of the biggest crackpots I've ever had the displeasure of coming across. He actually sent me a really nasty email one time because I was challenging some of this stuff publicly. And I've had people with really good intentions. I've had pictures that I wanted to have enhanced. I actually have one from Northern California here, where there is something in there, but I wanted it enhanced to see more of what it really was. So hopefully someday I'll find somebody that can really do that. But I had a couple of people who volunteered, said they knew how to play around with some of the programs and could do that. Neither one of them actually focused on the actual object, and I told them where the object was. I even circled it, I think, one time and sent it to them. But they would find artifacts in the picture that really weren't there. They were nothing more than light shadow. And when you look at a lot of these blob squatch pictures on, especially Facebook is horrible for this stuff. What's the one key? Yeah, what's the one key thing you see? The one thing that jumps right out at me when you see these. Oh no, not the red circle. Yes, the red circle. One of the things that really jumps out at me is when you look at these enhanced pictures and they're supposed to be this face or figure. Why is it that it's the same color as the background? If it was an actual animal there, it wouldn't be different shades of green. It would be whatever, it would be either dark or it would be the color of whatever you're looking at. It would stand out in contrast against the foliage, not the same color. So that tells me that there's something wrong with it. There was something in the manipulation. They created something or whatever, either inadvertently or they did it on purpose.
I noticed when I watched those is that the camera always bouncing around. Now, when I carried a weapon when I was in Iraq, everything was smooth. You held it and you watched it. Whatever your target was. I would say the same thing about a camera. If I see something, I'm holding it on there. Well, you can, but a lot of times people are scared, out of their wits, too. So, and I'll tell you one thing, me and an old friend Jack, and I said this quite a few times, but we were driving around
an area south of Bluff Creek, actually, a few years back. And now, granted, we were tired. We'd been out a long time, but we trained ourselves to be in the habit of carrying a camera, having it in your hand all the time. And both of us, and I think we had video cameras this particular time, small handheld camcorders on the ready, right? Driving down this road back to our camp about 1 o'clock in the morning. We were both tired, but we were talking, and in the peripheral light on the sides of the Suburban, there was a road that came in at an adjacent angle to the one we were on. And I saw this movement, something running. And I looked over immediately, and then just as soon as I looked, this little year-old bear come tear-assing out right in front of the vehicle, running like a little son of a gun down the road, right, keeping ahead of the Suburban. Jack even tried speeding up to see if he could catch up to it. But it was only like 5 feet in front of us. We could just barely look over the hood and see it. And then the little bugger, after maybe 30 seconds, darted off into the timber. And we stopped, and we looked at each other, and we said, well, some Sasquatch hunters we couldn't even film a little bear running in front of the truck. So, I mean, you kind of have to prepare yourself for that, and for one thing, and then, because when stuff happens, and we've had bear run in front of us quite a few times and never one picture of one of them. We were even driving down this same area one time during the day, and I know he was getting kind of bummed out because we'd been up there so long and hadn't seen anything. Of course, that's what happens in this subject. You spend a lot of time, and it turns up, empty-handed most of the time. But we were going down this road, and I remember it was kind of an overcast day, and it was like driving through a tunnel with all the trees going like this. And I was trying to cheer him up. I said, we got to be ready all the time because in this area there's a lot of activity. And I said, one might run across the road at any second. And I said, right up there, you see where that dark shape is? You watch, we're going to get up there, and that's going to get up and run across the road. And I'll be damned if it wasn't a 400-pound bear that did just that.
Oh, no.
And of course, we're crapping on ourselves. No pictures.
No picture.
So, but sort of back to the.
I hear you.
But go ahead, Joe. I think you were going to say something, weren't you?
Yeah, I was going to ask you. I sent you a picture here a while back. I don't know if you ever looked at it. I took a picture. It was a dark object, and I went back 2 weeks later with Lupin.
Yeah.
And I had him standing next to that same tree where the object was at.
Yeah.
And he was actually holding it. I don't know what it was. It could have been anything, I guess.
It's interesting, though. And there was no shadow the next time.
Yeah. Yeah, because actually the sun, the way I took the picture, the sun was behind me.
Yeah. So there shouldn't have been any shadow there, really.
Yeah. And where like Lupin reached up was 80 inches, which is 6'8", and this thing's still a foot taller than his hand.
It's interesting.
That's how that is.
And because at first I thought maybe it was like some bark, because sometimes that bark will peel off like a whole sheet. Right. But that tree had its bark on it. And then sometimes they have burns out there. I thought maybe it might have been a burnt stump.
See, and that's exactly the way we want things to do is to function in the field, is for everybody to go out there and try to rule everything else out. So what you're left with is a big question mark. But and then of course then you have to widen your circle to see if there's anything else around, any sort of supporting evidence. Which is one of the things these clowns on finding Bigfoot or not finding Bigfoot do. I've said this before. I think I said it last week. These bozos are down. They're smacking on a tree, and they're thinking they're hearing something. Respond, well, okay, it isn't that far away. Wait till daylight. Walk your lazy butts down there and do a search of the area. If there was something down there, there has to be some kind of supporting evidence. It can't just. I think all these people are just damn lazy. They hear something, they go trashing out of the woods, and they make all these wild claims. You didn't scrutinize it enough to find out what it was. Hell, I've been up.
It doesn't say how long they're out there in the first place. And then I just drive out there 5 minutes. I'm expected to see one. Come on.
Exactly.
It's
like I took one clown with me. We had a field team in area south of Mount St. Helens. This was back in the mid-'90s. And this guy, he's one of these self-proclaimed experts, even though he has a Bigfoot club. He originally was going to do a newsletter for.
I got one right over here somewhere, a Bigfoot club.
You remember, Milo, we started out, we called our first group PCSIT. It was Pierce
Yes,
County
I've read
Sasquatch
all that.
Investigation
Yeah.
Team. Well, when I moved
Yeah.
to Vancouver, we reconstituted the organization, calling it the Pacific Coast Sasquatch Investigation Team. We had about 100 members with a board of directors of 8 or 10 people, very good people, very good staff. And some of the people, we'd have meetings, board meetings, and then the members would show up. They wanted to listen in, and they could invite friends if they wanted to, if they were considering joining. So one of these, this guy came, this clown. I'm not going to say his name. I'm just going to say this clown, because even Renee was disgusted by the guy later on when I complained about him. He went with us. He was going to write a newsletter for us. He was all excited. He went to the field with us on a couple of trips. Would never go more than 10 feet from his camper, which was always parked on the logging road. And then one of these times, I had my field team out. We were going to start looking at a new area, and they were out doing some preliminary searches. And he and I walked up the road. I wanted to kind of get an overview of this canyon, and we heard a woodpecker. And he stopped. He froze. He says, "I think that's a Sasquatch trying to communicate."
Oh.
I looked at him, I kind of give him one of these looks, I said, "It's a woodpecker." No, I think if you were out in the woods, you reached down and picked up a stick, and he says, "I think if you could smack that on a tree or something, that'd make pretty good communication." It's a woodpecker. Yeah, it was obviously a woodpecker. And the guy just wasn't having it. And I think that was one of the origins of this nonsense that goes around out there. Now, it's not that these things don't make noises, with trees, because Brandy's recording, I think, is good evidence of that. But it's nothing like what all these people think. So it kind of goes hand in hand, I guess. Like I said, we always start off with one topic. We sort of keep going. We sort of slide sideways into other ones. But in terms of proof, and it's not just photographic proof, it's all proof. I probably could have found the bloody woodpecker and shown this guy, had he taken an interest and walked with me, and it was fairly close. But some people get things in their heads, and that's what they stick with, and then they get all kind. Have you noticed the people you see on Facebook, the people that get on, AM Coast to Coast and some of these other big radio shows? Absolutely worthless. I used to love the show when Art Bell did it many years ago, but today I wouldn't listen to it because, I know who some of these people are they put on these shows, and they know absolutely nothing. So that's my 2 cents worth on that one. But, they spout stuff with absolutely nothing to back up what they're saying. And I don't care, like what Renee would have said, how many, pictures of footprints you have or all this stuff. What do you got to support it? Did you tear that evidence apart? Did you really scrutinize it? Did you get to the bottom? Not like with Milo, with your and Brandy's situation going on there. When Tom and I were interviewing her earlier today, it was interesting because I've heard so many accounts over the years. Everything she talked about and brought up in that conversation, I've heard multiple times in other accounts. So I knew there was a lot of truth to what she was saying. I knew exactly the direction it was pointing in. It wasn't like the blackberry bush thing. I mean, I can't say that. You remember we used to walk from my parents' house
right
up the neighbor's driveway and go through the woods over to John's house, yeah. John Adams. I went up there one day. I was going to go by myself over to see John. And there was, that driveway was lined with big blackberry bushes, big tall ones. I got about halfway up that driveway and there was something on the other side. I can't say what it was, but it shook the entire blackberry bushes and was growling, a deep growl. I turned my butt around and walked right back to the house. I wasn't going just because, I even if it was a bear, I've confronted bear out in the wilderness. I don't want to do it again. Thank you very much. I can stay away from bear the rest of my life and be quite happy with that. But if it was one of these things too, I didn't want to confront one of those again either.
Yeah. No, the whole thing with Brandy, it's so, I don't want to say childlike, but it's so innocent that it's genuine.
Well, and she kind of dismissed it for a long time, for several years. I mean, this has been going on for 4 years.
Well, I think what it is, I mean, even we could say it about me too. I mean, I do it for the thrill of it. I don't do it because I'm going to be rich and famous. I want to do it for the fun. And that's we're talking for our group.
You can't really get involved in this for fame and fortune, because it's very fleeting, and good luck getting it.
Hey, that's why I retired out of the Army, so I can do stuff like this.
Coyote Man says, if they go look for evidence, they're afraid of it and will prove them wrong. Ignorance is bliss. Yeah, I think there's a lot to that. I think a lot of people, they want to dabble. There's a lot of people that love going to these little conferences. They get their 15 minutes of what they think is fame, in front of 30 people that are attending, and they're quite happy with that, because those people will listen to anything they spew. So, and here's something I was doing. I've been reworking my book, In Search of the Unknown. I only wrote about 76 pages because it was part of a larger project, and I'm adding a lot of material to that, including a ton of photos. Cool. So I was working today on the portion where we did the barbecue and potluck at Mount St. Helens back in 1992. And, that whole thing, we had no idea how big it was going to be. And, Renee was our guest speaker, and I gave a short talk to introduce him. And we had a lot of displays, and the food thing, we planned it for exactly the right time frame. It was in between two big holidays. There was nothing to do in the middle of summer. So everybody in the world came to it. There were at least a couple thousand people that showed up. And there would have been a lot more, I think, except we didn't get the posters printed in time. So we only had 2 to put up on 2 major highways in that area. So over a 2-day event, I know the store owner, and most people didn't go into the store, had 460 some people signed his guest book in the store alone. And there were a lot more people that didn't go in there. So by his estimates, we had, somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 people showed up. And when you look at these little Bigfoot events everywhere, you never get that many people. Renee said, we did something that had never been accomplished. And largely it was because of the way we presented the subject. It was, no nonsense, no silliness, none of that crap. We had a lot of people that came forward with their stories. Privately, what we did the first day was about doing stuff for the guests. The next day we set up some kind of like little cozy stations around the campground where there were, 5, 6, 7 people could sit, have coffee and pastry, and just chat. And we put our people in each one of those little spots, and we gained a ton of information. Everybody come out and told us stuff. So,
go ahead. Also on that point, and also the last question about how people go out and they look for evidence, or they're afraid to look for evidence. I think it also on both sides. I think it's like the finding Bigfoot people go out and they are expecting to find evidence, and then other people are going out. They're afraid to go out and find evidence. Whereas I think the most important thing is to go out and keep an open mind and to kind of be naturally skeptical. Right. And so
exactly. I think keeping a skeptical mind is probably the absolute best position to put yourself in, because then you're not going to fall for things. And when you do find something, you're going to weed out every possibility before even coming to the thought that it might be Sasquatch related. So, and of course that builds your credibility up, tenfold.
Definitely. And then also another question, how much of a difference do you think that the fact that like with modern technology, with the iPhones, you can just instantly, quickly, even though you said that a lot of times you're so stunned that it's hard to get that. But don't you think
it's that underwear changing moment,
It's like about 10 times more likely today that we're going to get that evidence, whereas, before,
Yeah, I think so. But here's a problem, too. If you go back in time, when the technology was a far cry less than what we have today, there were far fewer people out and about in the forest, especially anybody looking for these things. And in those days, because it was really the first time people went out and started looking for these things actively, they were able to find a lot more evidence because these things, I think, were sort of caught off guard. They weren't used to people actually looking for them. And because these things have an aversion to human contact, with more and more people encroaching on their areas, logging has changed all of their cyclical behaviors in their ranges. It's going to be a monumental task to try to relearn where all these ranges are and the new patterns in them. But it's not something that can't be done. It's just going to take a little time and effort to do it. So with that, a lot of people being out there, and these things are now, the population size has grown with them, but on the other hand, so is their wariness of people. So while the technology is better, there might be less opportunity on behalf of the creatures because they're maintaining a little more space. Not to say that they won't. Technology does afford us the ability to much more easily and quickly get that evidence. So I don't know if that explained it, kind of where things are.
Yeah.
It's a different set of circumstances now than, let's say, it was, in the 1960s, much more different.
I think it's more that you expect it to happen because of that technology, right?
Yeah. Exactly. I think our expectation is higher.
That when we do think that way, that it's instant.
Yeah. Coyote Man brings up a good point. It's great to have a GoPro. Absolutely. That would be a recommendation.
Yeah.
I would rather spend the money on a GoPro than a trail cam anytime, because these things will avoid trail cams. They haven't worked at all in the subject. So I say it's a waste of money using one. Whereas a GoPro, if you've got one on, like he says, be sure to turn it on. If you happen to encounter one, there you go. You've got great
I'll have it in the back
film.
of my head when I'm running the other way.
That's right. Make sure you bring somebody slower than you so you don't get caught.
Yeah.
Did you guys notice at the end of that video, I was thinking about it, I watched it again earlier, when I was making notes, that Renee was talking about the very end. He said there was some guy that was talking about wanting to enter the academia field of academia, and he said macadamia. Yeah.
Oh.
And Renee practically wet himself laughing over that one because he thought scientists were nuts anyway. And here's the guy saying he wants to enter macadamia. He wants to enter being a nut.
Yeah.
He used to say, one of his common things he used to say was, when somebody would tell him they had a PhD, he'd say, "I'm sorry, what's the prognosis?" And they'd look at him funny and they'd say, "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, I thought you had an incurable brain disorder."
Hey, Will, here's another question too about the topic, Bigfoot photo evidence, what to look for. It's one of the kind of challenges, the fact that there's so many different types out there and they all kind of look different, that it's tough to determine, like, if you see a photo, like, is this legit? Because it could be, but there's, it could be totally different than another legit photo that looks like something totally different,
See, exactly. That's a problem that I had a few years ago, and I mentioned this previously, but my now late friend Bobby Short, who had the Bigfoot Evidence website, we used to talk all the time and sort of compare notes and stuff. Like, she's the one that got me into doing radio. We discuss our individual sightings with each other, and the one thing that stood out almost immediately was there were huge differences between what she saw and what I saw. And because she was a good friend, I never wanted to get in an argument with her. Just what I didn't feel it was worth, losing a friendship over an argument. I just thought, well, maybe there's another answer. And it didn't really occur to me until after she passed away. And our friend, Mr. Black, contacted me, and he says, well, there is an answer to that. There are actually 4, maybe 5 different types of these creatures with some very different physical characteristics from one type to the other.
Different colors sometimes.
Different colors, absolutely. And even within the same group, let's say the type 1s like the Patterson Sasquatch, if 10 people saw 10 different animals of that particular type, no 2 descriptions are going to be identical because you have variation within a species. Just like the 4 of us sitting here. We all have all the characteristics of being human beings, Homo sapiens. but no two of us look exactly alike.
Thank God
because of those variations within the species. Don't insult all the guys, Milo. Gee.
Hey, I'm trying to protect you guys from me.
But you see what I'm saying. That's right. Only one Milo.
Yeah,
but you see what I'm saying. And that does account for a percentage of the discrepancies from one sighting to the next, or even photographic evidence. And there are some pictures out there, and I wished I could think of the name of the video. There's one very short one where a family stopped by a river. I think it was in British Columbia. There's snow on the ground. They stopped to take pictures or whatever. And over next to the tree line, you see this thing get up and it walks quickly into the timber. To me, that's probably the most legitimate one I've seen out there since the Patterson film, because it looks exactly like what I saw.
Do you have like the title
it moves
of it?
Right. I don't have the title of it. I'll have to find it.
That'd be cool to look
Yeah,
at.
I've seen it before too.
Yeah, it's a good one. I think it's legit. I think that one is. Now that's just my opinion, but having seen these things, knowing how they move and everything, that one fits the bill. It looks exactly like what we should expect to see.
Well,
now, if it's fake,
something to measure it by.
Yeah, unfortunately, they put those, people put those things out now. Even if they're legitimate, there's no context. And we've talked about that numerous times on the blab here about context. Context is everything. If we don't have, all the surrounding facts supporting that video, then it's really meaningless. It's interesting. They get lots of views on YouTube, maybe make a couple of bucks if they get 1 million views or something. And I think it's like, they get $100 per 100,000 views, something like that. To me, it's not worth the effort to go fake something to try to make a couple $100, to be honest with you. Even if you have some now, and I'll tell you, I've got a picture that was sent to me by someone in Michigan. The photograph, it's a still photo, and I think you've seen it, Joe, right?
You gotta refresh my memory.
It's a picture of this thing walking away from whoever took the picture. It's in a forest, and I'll have to see if you have. Same with you guys. I'll show you. I don't show too many people yet, but it looks 100% legitimate to me. The problem with it, I'm going to put it in one of the new books as just an item of interest because I don't have the backstory to it. The person who sent it to me, it was given to her by friends who took the picture, and the people who took the picture are in absolute denial of what's there. So, but it's obviously it's not a bear, and it's enormous. It's a clear picture. It's not one of these blob squatch things. It's in the middle of the daytime. It's in a relatively open area. It's in a stand of trees, but it's open and it's a lot of daylight. So, again, without the context, it's nothing more than an item of interest, but it's a clear picture. There are probably a lot more pictures like that one out there that people are afraid to bring out. This person didn't want to share the picture with anybody until she heard me talking on the radio, and she thought that I was, the person it was okay to send the picture to. So it's a fascinating picture, but without any context behind it, it really doesn't do much good to us.
Well, here's another question. In terms of photo evidence, where do you see the most sort of evidence coming from? Like what parts of the country, I should ask? Yeah.
Pictures? I think predominantly the Northwest, but now we get a lot of stuff from, say, Florida and places like that too. And again, how legitimate that is, I have no idea. Most of what I looked at, and I have a friend who, I don't know if he still works for YouTube or not, but one of the people I know worked to vet a lot of the pictures that were sent to YouTube. And he said the vast majority of them are fake. They're garbage. He says, we put them up there anyway, but, when they check them out, they know they're crap. And it's unfortunate with this subject. There's so much of that kind of stuff because it really is, like Renee said, it's a fascinating topic. It really is. For whatever individual qualities of the subject fascinate each person, It, just the prospect of, big hairy monsters that walk around like we do out in the forest kind of grabs your imagination. And of course, the more you learn about it, I know myself, the stuff I've learned in just the past year have made me a little bit more frightened of the forest than I ever was before. It used to be I wasn't, because the original mindset was, well, they're solitary creatures. They don't hurt anybody. They just kind of wander around out through the woods and keep to themselves. That's sort of the predominant thought. And the reality of that is far, far from that thinking.
Where was it? Where was it when we were? I mean, we were in high school when I heard this, and I know we were talking about it. But was there some place where some like miners or loggers, they had their cabin just get rocked by boulders?
That's where we went. Remember, that's where we went in 1976.
1924.
Yeah. Milo was with me. One of the guys, when we camped, were at the site. That's where the cabin was, in that little stand of trees.
Yeah.
That was the cabin site, that location. Which kind of cracked up on a side note. I've seen people on Facebook or wherever, or on the internet in the last year or two, saying that the lost cabin site was found. It was never lost. We always knew where it was. I mean, it was near the head of Ape Canyon.
Yeah.
There's only two ways you can get to it, I mean, and it's right there. It's pretty easy to find. But back in 1976, John Green referred a college student in Portland, Oregon, to me, this kid that's, 17, 18 years old at the time. The college student was doing a paper on Bigfoot, and he called John Green, and Green referred him to me, having seen one of these, or two of these things, actually. So, I told him about what happened and everything, and he says, kind of in exchange for the information, he says, have you ever been to the site of the 1924 miners attack? And I said, no. I've hunted the area with my dad and uncle, but I've never been in that area. So he told me how to find the location. So 6 of us made that trip, and that was a crazy, Milo shaking his head. That was a crazy trip.
He who shall not be named.
We had one guy in our group that just defies explanation.
Oh,
every time we'd go someplace, we'd always put our packs on. We'd go someplace, whether it was just hiking or if we were out actually looking for these things. And he's the same guy at the Clark incident in Roy, who was grabbed and pulled partially out of the tent that night. The guys used to joke about it all the time, because whenever he would go someplace with his pack on, he would inevitably drop something off his pack. He never talked very like, say, he kind of mumbled, my gear. And they're like, oh crap, we got to stop. Dummy dropped something off his pack. And in Mount St. Helens, he dropped his entire pack. And everything spilled out on the side of the mountain and went everywhere.
Well, the hard part with that was you just let it watch it roll down. I'm like...
It was so funny. Now, our friend Brian was a cross-country runner, and all of us used to ride our bikes a lot. We were all in pretty good shape back then. Of course, we're kids. We hiked up, and it was just a horrible hike. We were up to our knees in pumice, and it was probably about a mile up that slope to Windy Pass from where we parked the van. So we were pretty tired. Me and Brian were up there. We were probably 100 yards ahead of the rest of these guys. And we decided to sit. And that time, of course, it's all been blown away since the mountain blew, but it used to be just a passage through solid rock. So we sat inside there out of the wind and decided to hang out and rest up and wait for the rest of the guys to catch up before we'd go on. And a few minutes later, here comes Milo. He comes up there, and he was just tongue-tied, swearing, and going through all these motions. And Brian says, Milo, English, what happened? And he says, oh, dumb so-and-so down there, dropped my gear. And we said, did Paul drop something? And he says, yeah, dummy dropped his whole pack. And I said, did you tell him to pick it up? He looked like somebody slapped him. He says, I'll be right back. Off he went back down the slope. So Brian looks at me and he says, what a dumbass. So, Brian was Mr. Caustic Tongue there. He was always talking about somebody. So 5 minutes later, here comes Milo, just as mad as he was the first time. And we're like, oh, God, what happened now? And he says, I got down there and watched his pack open and roll all down the side of the mountain. Everything came out. And I said, oh, God. I said, well, can he reach into it? He says, no. I said, don't worry about it. We got to go back to the van after we find a place to camp and get the tent and our food. So we found where the cabin site was, and three of us, was it you, me, and Brian, I think, went back.
The three of us.
So we went back down the mountainside, and we saw over, where he'd been sitting and dropped all these stuff. We just ignored it going down the mountain. Now, we're carrying this cabin tent. This thing is an old heavy canvas. 6 foot, canvas cabin tent, and it took two of us to carry it. Now, we've each got a backpack full of canned food also because we were too stupid to buy something light. So we're finding our way up the side of Mount St. Helens.
Oh, man, what do you want?
And we got to where they had stopped, where Paul's pack was, and I said, okay, we need to take a break here, take a rest, put everything down. And after we rested up a bit, I walked over to see what there was, what we could salvage out of his pack. There was only 3 items in his pack: long underwear, plastic ship models, and baseball cards. That was it. That's all he'd packed. I said, guys, come here and look at this.
Well, I saw it roll down. I watched it.
Milo was like, oh my God. I said, we're not picking all this crap up. We'll grab some of his long underwear and throw it in a bag. If he wants the rest of it, when we leave at the end of the week, he can come down here and pick it up. I said, we're not touching this crap. We're not wasting the effort. So we headed up, we did the camp, and of course the whole time there was all kinds of crazy stuff that went on that was just funnier than hell the whole time. We did find a line of Sasquatch tracks the first night before we headed up the mountain, though, but that was, of course, Brian, you're doing the screenplay. I don't know if you got to that part yet, but I'll fill you in more on what happened during that trip. There was stuff I left out of the book. I left the juicy stuff out.
Thank you. I'm glad. You did not leave out the part about the gunpowder, though.
Oh no, that's in there.
Yeah, no, I saw.
Yeah, we thought Paul only had 3 items with him. There was a 4th. He had a black powder rifle, and he used to shoot black powder once in a while. He had 2 pounds of black powder. Now this guy, you got to remember, we're wearing jeans, and this is 1976. We're kind of dressed for hiking, in the wilderness up there, except for Paul. Paul had a long army trench coat on, an army steel helmet, and green rubber barn boots. Yeah, if that didn't paint a picture. And he had 2 pounds of black powder in one of his pockets. Well, the last morning up there, it snowed, and it snowed pretty heavy. I mean, the really big flakes. And we'd had our fire going the whole time we were there, and it was a really thick bed of coals, like that. And we'd gone to sleep and figured, well, we're packing up in the morning, we're going to leave, so we'll just let the fire go out. Well, we got up, and it was cold as hell and wet, and we figured we better get the fire going, so we kind of dry out a little bit while we're packing stuff, and we knew we needed to get out of there because we didn't want to get snowed in. We had a long hike to get out of there. So we, there were 6 of us on the trip. So 4 of us go out foraging for tree limbs and other firewood out there. And we all converged about the same time, into the tree line, about 20 feet apart. And here's Milo and Paul over at the fire. Milo squatted down, blowing on the coals. Paul's standing over him, pouring black powder on the coals. We all looked at each other and started backing up with our armloads of wood. We started just backing up. It was instinct. We knew it was going to happen. And shortly thereafter, it was like a mini Mount St. Helens explosion. There was this huge cloud of ash. It went woof. And all we could hear was Paul coughing in the background. So when the dust finally cleared, we're pretty concerned. We think these guys are seriously injured. Milo's still sitting. He squatted down with his arms over his knees like this, just with dazed look. And he had a kind of a little goatee. And his hair was pretty wild, and everything was singed off like this in the front. And Paul was standing there coughing his lungs out. And after we figured out they were okay, it was just this boneheaded move. We all literally laid on the ground, rolling around laughing. It was so funny. We thought it was the dumbest thing we ever saw. But that whole trip was just like that. I mean, our group was like that. I mean, they called us the Bozo Brigade in high school, and I think it was well deserved.
Yeah.
Because every moment with the whole, and there was like 10 of us in our group, and we all hung out together. We took all our classes together. It was just nonstop like that all the time. The crap we did.
Our teachers hated us, but we had a great time.
I know that sort of went off topic, but towards the end here, we have fun a little bit talking about those funny things, and it really was hilarious. I mean, yeah, I'm sure like you're doing the screenplay, Brian. If they actually did something like that, and reenacted that. Yeah, I think audiences would probably laugh their butts off because, it was a bunch of dumb adolescent stuff, but it was funny. Just
you can't make that stuff
no,
up.
You can't make that up. I mean, the crap that we did back then. But, the first night, and when we did find a line of Sasquatch tracks, and they were actually pretty good tracks. I sent the pictures to John Green, and Green said, yeah, those were pretty good prints. But what we were doing when we found the prints was not so bright. Anybody who knows anything about pumice knows it's volcanic glass, right? So what do? We figured out, we couldn't start a fire because it was too windy. Couldn't go to sleep, couldn't set the tent up or anything. So we got bored, so we decided to go for a walk, and it was really bright moonlight. Unlike another story I know about that was fake, but this night it was, bright moonlight. It was just like daylight. Just like daylight. So we hiked up this ridge, and somehow one of us found out that pumice is slippery. And it was this big slope that went several hundred yards down. At the bottom, there were little fir trees about 3 or 4 feet tall. So we'd sit on our butts and slide like hell down these hills, climb back up and do it again. Well, after about an hour or so, that wasn't a Milo, maybe an hour or two.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it took us an hour just to climb back up sometimes, but I would say
some of us noticed our backsides were getting a little cold.
Yeah.
Well, until somebody looked and said, yeah, because the pumice ate the butts out of our jeans, so our bare backsides were hanging out in the breeze.
Oh shit!
So we figured we better go back to the van and change our pants, right? We get back to the van, and Scott, who borrowed his dad's brand new VW van, lost the gas cap on the way there, lost his keys, and we'd all pooled all of our money with him and his wallet, right, for food and gas and all this stuff. So he lost his wallet and the keys somewhere up on this damn mountain. So here we were with our butts hanging out of our back of our pants that were gone. We hiked back up there, and the wind's blowing, our butts are cold. And we got to look for the keys and the wallet. So while we were searching the area where we would sit down and slide, one of the guys, Kirk, I think, noticed this line of tracks. It was just off the side, and it went up this ridge as far as you could see. There were hundreds, probably thousands of tracks. And they were, I think if you calculate for slide in the pumice, they were probably 17, 18-inch tracks. I think we measured 19. Yeah. We measured 19, but I think because of the slippage, they were actually a little shorter. But it was a great line of Sasquatch tracks, and there were probably, 5-foot gap in between the prints going up this doggone ridge as far as you could see.
Yeah. See, that was different.
It was steep.
Unique because they were going up. They weren't coming down.
Yeah, it was walking up. It was walking up the hill.
Yeah.
So I mean, it wasn't a completely wasted trip, aside from the humor. But we talk about ignoring your surroundings when these things are around, and trucks weren't that old, so we kind of theorized, well, maybe it found the wallet and the keys. I think Scott took them out of his pocket and set them down, is what I think. But at the time we were thinking, well, they were, he says, oh, they were in my pocket. They had to have been there. And we figured they were buried under pumice, down the mountainside somewhere. But here they were sitting right on this little spot next to where we were sitting down to slide. And at the time, the idea was, well, maybe what made the tracks found it and put it over here. But I think Scott took them out of his pocket and set it down, is what I think. So anyway, that was our little humor. I know we were sort of sidetracked from what we were discussing, but that's what we do on this blab. So we don't always stay on topic. We sort of start in one spot and then we go into a uncontrolled slide, all these different directions. If your TW comes, he's always late. We're getting ready to wrap it up, and he comes on. You know who TW is, don't you, Milo?
Yeah, you'll find out soon.
He does all the memes
on the
Facebook page.
Yeah.
Oh, I feel bad. We're getting these people that are coming on now, and we're getting ready to wrap it up. I mean, I don't know how much longer you guys want to go.
We'll have the archive, right?
We'll have the archive, of course. Holy cow! We got all these people joining up now, and we're getting ready to stop. You guys have to come on earlier. Well, do you guys have anything else you want to add, or?
Well, the whole thing with Brandy and
Fun.
just the whole evidence thing. I like the ideas. I like the idea that what Joe said about comparing like the stop sign and putting somebody out there to measure
Right.
the differences. I do like that stuff.
See, and again, that's all part of context. Everything has to be in context, and it has to be relatable so that anybody who isn't familiar with it can look at that and say, well, you've got your iPhone next to whatever it is, and they everybody knows what that is, and they look at what that is compared to it, and at least they get a size comparison because they know what that is. I always tell people, use something like a Coke can or a pen or something that we all have familiarity with, if nothing else, even if you don't have a tape measure. Although, I recommend carrying even a little one like this. You can get them little, 10 or 16 foot tape measures that you can just stick in your pocket. Mm-hmm. Should always have a tape measure, always have a camera, always have a recorder.
Yep. Those three things. And even utility belt. I'm ready to go.
That's right. You're Batman. I'll tell you what, I used to carry, and I don't have it anymore. I'd like to get another one. Cabela sells it's like a hunting harness. It's like our old LBE from the Army. It's a belt with suspenders. It has a butt pack. It has pouches on the sides, and you can add all kinds of stuff to it. And it's really lightweight. So when you get out of your vehicle, you can throw one arm in it, slap the other one around, you hook it. It's on them in a matter of just a couple of seconds, and off you go. You've got all your gear. And I always carried my camera gear, all my stuff in it, and it's set up so it rides on your hip bones. So the weight's in a place where it's not going to fatigue you that much. But you can go to Cabela's and buy that. I think the whole thing for a couple $100. And believe me, if you're going to spend a lot of time out in the woods, it's really worth the investment. In fact, I should actually put a link to that with pictures on the Facebook page so that you guys can take a look. If anybody wants it, go on there and get it. By all means, it's really worth having. I think very lightweight.
A couple of stuff from my Army days in Iraq, where we have all that stuff with camelbacks and all that. So I'm good. I have. I just call it my Batman utility belt.
TW is talking all this stuff, but he's not coming on here. He's on the pot. He got in trouble being on the toilet one night when he came on here. He was on the toilet. One of his little kids was there, and his wife was giving him hell for doing something with the toilet. See, so we're on to you. We know what kind of trouble you're into. Oh, he's saying carrying the shit like he did.
What is that?
Well, fellas, unless we have something else, I think that's about it for this week.
No, the whole thing with the Brandy's.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
With her Skype interview and stuff. So it did really good.
Oh, she did awesome. Yeah, she thought she stammered and stuff, but she did a really great job. So it was a good interview, good solid one. And Tom and I sort of, we took everything step by step and I think covered everything pretty thoroughly. Yeah. So
I just told her, I told her, just be who she is when she talked to me, and it'd be great for her. So, and they're eager, and once that our little group, the nucleus of that, when we start heading out, it'll be some good.
Oh, Milo, while you're here, she mentioned some bedding spots.
Yeah.
You took pictures of. If you can go back there, take some of the clippings from the middle of those. Usually there's hair in that stuff.
Yeah, I'll try to get in there. It's all locked up. It's part of Pierce County's stuff, and it's all locked up and with fine, no trespassing signs, you'll be shot kind of crap.
Yeah, you weren't able to hear back from them yet, huh?
No, they're they take their time with that.
That's true. Okay, fellas. Well, listen, for anybody listening who hasn't checked it out yet, go to the website, williamjebning.com. Take a look. If you want to join one of our teams that already exist or create a team, get a hold of one of the regionals or Milo. Milo's a new assistant regional director. So, or if any of the teams are on, get a hold of somebody. let them know your interest. Check the Facebook page out. It's a JRG Bigfoot research page. Join up there, and you'll get in on all the jokes and stuff that go on, but also a lot more interesting things that go on with the teams and the regionals. So keep in touch, everybody. Join up, and TW is trying to bait you guys, but we're going to sign out, TW. So we'll talk to you later, man. All right, everyone. We'll see you again next week.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
See ya.